room. Hello, friends. Okay, I know this was short notice, as is often the case, because I often decide in a fairly impromptu fashion that I want to go live, and so I will take my time getting in the zone today, let a few people show up if they're gonna show up, and let's take a look at what's been going on with the show. Now, you guys have been asking on Discord, well, I mean, Darren made a comment that it would be cool to see some of the changes. I'm not going to play the whole episode, okay? But if you look at the edit here, what you see is, you can see there's a million edits. They're all over the place. When we started, all of these clips for the voices, the sound effects, the music, all of these clips were one single clip. And so if you look here, we are at 24 minutes and 37 seconds, and that does include, by the way, the intro to the show, which is a full minute. I believe that's right. Yeah, so it looks like we might have 4 seconds of leader at the beginning. Yeah, more or less. Kinda, sorta. But, so this has been a pretty rigorous process, frankly, of going through, and the nice thing in Vegas, which I'm sure other editors work this way as well, but the nice thing in Vegas is if I click anywhere in an empty area in the timeline and hit the S key to split my tracks, it'll actually split everything. So that makes it pretty easy. You know, you hit the S key and you make a split. Let's say, actually, let me find an example of it. It's going to be, actually, strike that. It's going to be hard to find an example because normally after I make an edit, the very first thing I do is start overlapping the tracks. As Darren mentioned in his comment, I'd never actually heard it referred to as this before, but he referred to it as an L cut or a J cut, and that's exactly right. The idea is that the audio either prevails underneath the cut point on the video or vice versa, where you see here that there's a cut in the audio but the video keeps going over top of it. So the idea is to basically, you know, you take an edit, and most shows or movies are going to start this way. You edit things together. You are reticent to be too aggressive and just cut things out, and you know, you because you want to see what you're going to have. Well, Sifter, hey, Ross and Sifter, we're not finished. Okay, so I take your meaning for sure, but yeah, we're not even close to being finished, because if you look at when we get up here to the stuff I've been working on for the last, you know, say 24 hours, there's certainly a lot of things that are helping to improve the look of the show that are going to, I'm going to want to roll back to earlier shots and make some of those same improvements, right? So, but when you, so the procedure, just for those who don't know, is to, you know, maybe you got a shot, especially in a case like this where you've got dialogue going on, you got two people talking to each other. You know, you've got a shot that's got a voice track on it, and then the next shot also has a voice track. Well, you go ahead and split that, and then normally after a split, what I'll do is I'll just go like this. I'll make a selection of time that, like, for example, here you've got audio. So theoretically, this would be maybe a candidate for this type of thing, where you say, okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take all of this area and just delete it and ripple edit it so that these two dialogue tracks are a little bit closer together, and then make adjustments so that the video overlaps, and you get a lot more cases, many more cases, where a character is talking, but it cuts away to the other character while the other person's still saying their line of dialogue. And what that does is a couple things. Number one, the whole show will play much more smoothly, if you will. It's gonna, everything really hums along a lot better. I'm gonna skip this section because this is the flashback. I'm gonna jump ahead here. And the other thing it does is just cut the show down, because I mean we're talking about a show that went from, what was it? It was over 27 minutes, and now it's under 25. So that's a big change. So let's just take a look here for a little bit, just kind of get our...
Basher, you really didn't explain anything
Oh,
about...
no more time. The poor and the hungry aren't going to feed themselves.
Let's jump ahead to the next sequence.
There you are.
Bless you, Asher. I wish we didn't need the help, but with the king's taxes so high...
Oh, it's nothing.
So here you see
Where
I'm
is
already starting to
Melchizedek?
use gradients more liberally, and shadows to just punch up the overall production quality. This section through here with Luca has been chopped down quite a bit, actually, so you'll see. But you probably won't remember how it was before.
Hey, Luca.
Oh, hey, Melchizedek.
Who's your friend?
I don't know. He's just been sort of following me around.
Alms for the blind.
Huh?
Is there no one to help? Alms for a poor
So again,
blind
you see all the
man.
overlaps. This
course.
is chopped down so much, it's just ridiculous, and it plays so much more smoothly. The guys,
Is there no one to help?
there's an
Alms
entire shot
for a
of Carliano that was
blind
removed,
man.
and while he's
course.
saying his line
No
of
one
dialogue,
to
we just
help.
jump right to TNR, and she's walking up. So you
Alms
really
for a
want to just
poor blind man.
clamp it down, baby.
Of course.
Push that stuff
How
together.
can I help?
Money would be good.
Here it jumps quicker back to Mel.
Wow.
Hey, I've got an idea. I will call him Monkey.
Okay. Bless you, my child.
Tianara,
Again, there's a couple weak shots
what
there.
are you
The
doing?
wide shot of Carliano's removed completely.
He has nothing.
Tianara, we do not talk to such people.
But surely it can't hurt to...
Remember who you are, Tianara.
That's rough. Am I right?
We have so much.
I have heard enough.
There's one of those
Order.
overlaps.
Yes, ma'am.
Confine Tianara to the wagons.
Yes, ma'am.
She's a little harsh.
So I would think anybody who's well acquainted with the show, which probably most of you aren't obviously anywhere near as well acquainted with it as I am, but if you're well acquainted with the show, you will agree that it's just humming along way better. It feels like it's starting to really start to feel like a show. This shot I actually just redid. I did the pencil
Thank you,
test
little friend.
on a live stream, and I think I did the
Wow.
ink and paint offline.
That'll work.
So, let me pause for a moment and look at what the questions are. Citra says, do you think you could have avoided the ripple cutting part? No, absolutely not. That's not avoidable. This would be, I said I was going to talk about what I've learned, and when it comes to editing, without a doubt, I've never done a movie, and I'm seeing it's really been a deja vu situation where things that I experienced repeatedly editing films all came back when I was doing the edit here. So what happens is you wind up with a show that's a little bit longer than it needs to be, and if you have a 24-minute or 22, really 22 and a half, I think I don't know what the official length is for cartoons, but it's something like 22 and a half. And when you edit it improperly, in other words, loosely, where every time there's a line of dialogue, it goes ahead and jumps back to the other person and that sort of thing. What happens is you will wind up with a show that's a little too long, and that's a good thing. And so you want that. And the reason you want that is that those L cuts and those J cuts that make it start to really move along like a professional show, you've got the choice. You begin to make these creative choices about, well, do I want to actually stay on this character when the other guy starts talking, for example, or do I want to go ahead and bring that character in over top of the other? You know what I mean? You can decide, and it's a judgment call. It's always it's a real creative process. Let's put it that way. Maria says, "Hey, Al, getting ready." Blah, blah, blah. Okay, got it. Because 1 page equals 1 minute, right? And if you see 20, right? In my script, it's interesting. I mean, my script that is the rule that you're saying about 1 minute of screenplay. In my filmmaking career, I have found it to be scarily true. And the script for the double-length pilot of this show is actually 52 pages. How long did the 2 episodes come out? Well, the first one was 27 minutes and the second one was 26. So the loose edit came out to about 53 minutes. So it was really close. Now, the good news is, you don't have to be as aggressive. I'm feeling pretty lucky in that when I've talked all along about the show having 24-minute episodes, but I've left it kind of loosey-goosey whether that includes an intro and an outro, or whether that's just the length that I'm shooting for in the actual content of the episode. I kind of knew that probably it was going to include the intro and the outro. And moreover, if an appropriate edit that really got the show feeling right, like this is good kind of thing, if you get it to that point and you're too short, well, I mean, it's a cartoon, and like all anime, you can always invent some little, chibi character vignette thing at the end of the show, or you could spend a little more time with, coming next time on the next episode. There's all kinds of ways that you can make everything fit if you really have to, right? People have been doing it for generations on television because television is a pretty unyielding medium when it comes to show length, right? And how much space you have to leave for commercials, So everything I'm describing about the edit process is both necessary and good. Everything about it is positive. Okay, so let me get back here to the show. Nugget 40. Yes, too long than too short for sure is better. But what I would say is that if you as an animator in particular, look, if you go back to the Warner Brothers shorts, they and Chuck Jones in his the late Chuck Jones in books talked about this. They literally timed those cartoons out to the frame. Every single thing was timed in advance, and so it was edited before it was created. As far as I'm concerned, that's fine. That's great if you can do it. It's a wonderful goal if that's what you want to shoot for. To me, I don't really care about that because I've always kind of looked at this as at the end of the day, it's going to be a standard editing process like what I'm used to, So let's just kind of carry on here. This section probably not so much because really there's not much change here. You can see that there's no cuts in the dialogue. So you get into here.
Her? Of course. Jones land in the north.
Where the rain still falls?
That's right. She's selling her crops. A steep price, I expect. Say, how's that laundry coming along?
Yeah, so now this is a really interesting case. This sequence felt strange and awkward. And the reason it felt strange and awkward is because Mel's talking about the girl he just saw, and Asher's explaining that he knows the girl's mother. She's a merchant from the Northlands, yada, yada, yada. So they're talking about this, and then it really felt awkward because just like out of the blue, Asher says, hey, how's that laundry coming along? It really didn't feel like it belonged. It's still a little bit stiff, a little bit awkward, but not like it was. And my solution was, we know that Mel's already a little gobsmacked here because, wow, holy cow, you know this woman. So it's like, he's just kind of surprised by that. But that's not unusual. Asher seems to know everybody in the region. He's known and knows everybody. Anyway, but this is the frame of mind that Melchizedek is in, and that's the important thing. So what I did was I actually took this still frame. This is just a still frame stolen from the image sequence here. And I said, well, let's let Asher keep talking, and I removed the space in between the lines of dialogue. And so Asher just flows nonchalantly, almost like he's changing the subject. Okay, so you look at how it plays now.
She's selling her crops. A steep price, I expect. Say, how's that laundry coming along?
You see that? Now all of a sudden, from an acting
I
standpoint,
might have kind of forgot the
it's actually
laundry.
kind of a funny little button
And
on
your
the scene.
studies, too. Ready for your test?
Now this transition was also closed
Better get
completely,
cracking.
much shorter.
As for me, I think it's time to pay the king a little visit.
And then boom, we're right into the next scene. So it's not like the webisodes where we have all this, breathing space in between sections. Okay. Jumping ahead, I'm going to skip where there hasn't been a ton of editing. So this, you can see right here, tons of editing. What happened here? Let's take a look.
You cannot collect taxes.
Oh, yes. So this is where Golik's basically persuading the king of his scheme to have let's marry these kids together. Now, of course, what he isn't telling the king is that gives Golik a sort of an indirect pathway, not a direct shot, but an indirect pathway to the throne, right? So that's sort of his little secret, right? But let's just
have a
take look.
point. What?
You'll see lots of overlap here in the dialogue.
You
by the way.
cannot collect taxes or debts on empty land. What do you mean by empty? I hear of nobles going north where the land is fertile. But what if Carliana's Northlands were part of your kingdom? Without the support of the nobles, how can we raise an army?
I do need to
Not
fix his
war,
lips, his mouth, I
Highness.
mean. By
An
the way.
alliance.
I know, I'm aware that
What
looks
do
a
you
little
mean?
chinky.
Well, the prince is of age, as is Carliana's daughter. Can it be arranged? I can only try, my lord.
So we'll keep watching here because there's a lot of edits
His
here with
Highness
this stuff
the
with
Prince
Vespar.
and the Honorable Tobias.
Ah, yes. We were just talking about you, my son.
Father, I saw Asher on my way in, and he didn't even speak to me.
That meddler
This
is
is
an
so
enemy of the
chopped
crown.
down. This is so much more condensed from what it was. It's awesome.
What? Asher? The holy man? If I may speak, Highness,
By all means, Tobias.
one might say that Asher is the voice of the people.
Yes.
Well, surely the king must hear the people's voice in order to rule with wisdom.
Majesty, I venture to say there are more pressing
Aren't
matters
those
to attend to
overlaps
than
great?
Asher.
I just
And
love
indeed,
it.
I have matters to attend to as well, Highness, with your leave.
Of course.
And a couple of the shots were even rearranged to make it all play better.
Father?
Now, here what
You're
I did. Now,
very
this is
nearly a
interesting
Mac.
too. This was not quite working because Vespar just says the word father out of the blue, like you're not really sure why. So what I did was I did the same thing here again, where I quite literally stole a still image, and I thought this is actually funnier if Tobias excuses himself and then Vespigi is just staring at his son and it's making Vespar uncomfortable.
course.
You see what I
You're
mean?
very nearly a
Now,
man.
you guys might disagree. You know, maybe it's not like the greatest solution in the world, but for me, I was like, that works way better. Just this really awkward silence.
Father?
You're very nearly a man, aren't you?
Well, that was out of the blue.
I guess so.
We feel it may be time for you to take a wife.
Wife? I don't even have a girlfriend.
Ah, Vespa, you know a prince doesn't marry for love.
He doesn't?
Majesty, if I may.
So yeah, this is
A
a great
ruler
example.
must
of what
think
I'm talking
about what will best serve
Everything's
the
just
kingdom
go.
and best unite the people.
Tight.
You've
That's
got to
right,
be
Ross.
kidding me.
Tight is the
I'm
word.
sure you want to do your duty. Now, about those items we were discussing. I'll deal with Asher soon enough. But now I have other fish to fry.
Okay, let's keep looking here. So now this stuff, I think visually some things through here probably need some punching up. But basically it works pretty well. I think there was some editing on the visuals just to kind of... There was a piece that I cut out right there completely. But you can see the dialogue didn't get chopped too much, so I'm just going to go forward here and just kind of see what I have. Okay, yeah, so now here, this is a pretty entertaining section, and again, there's certainly some chopping down there.
Another shirt.
So Melchizedek realized that he got the shirt all covered with ink, so that's a problem, right? I'm drinking my brewski, by the
What's
way.
another shirt? That'll do it. He'll never miss it. Melchizedek?
So all in all, basically, most of this felt
Oh,
pretty
hey,
tight
Asher.
already.
How'd it go with the king?
So what I'm looking at here is, is there something that's propelling it forward? You know, he says his line of dialogue, and then I would have cut this, but he breaks into the whistling thing, which is kind of cute. So it's like, as long as there's something happening, you know, and it's not just dead time.
I say what I must. The Speaky will never listen to me.
This is also an example where Asher originally said, and then he says his line of dialogue. So I just took the I just took it out. It's not helping. There's no reason to keep it.
I say what I must. The Speaky will never listen to me.
Overlap?
I suppose not.
Yeah, this is way tighter now.
Ah, well, have you finished washing my ceremonial robe? I expect it to look like new.
Oh, by any chance, did it have a red stripe? Say no, say no, say no.
That's the one. Why do you ask? You weren't thinking about that girl again, were you?
Okay, so as far as the girl goes, let's skip ahead. There really was just one little bit
Got
here.
yourself grounded, didn't you?
He had a longer line of dialogue, and it's like I'm looking for the non-essentials that I can just chop out. Another thing that, by the way, is kind of surprising is that despite the fact that a lot of the show was Mickey Moused on the score, I've been kind of surprised how often I've been able to actually cut the music, which theoretically you're going to lose the rhythm, and it just doesn't matter. You can't hear it, especially if you just adjust the music cut points so that they fall under a line of dialogue. You just don't really think about it. So let's go forward. Now we're getting into the stuff. This was chopped down a lot too. Oh my gosh, this was shortened a good bit.
Married?
Isn't it wonderful?
Father never would have.
Tianara, enough of this. You will
So
not dishonor
what
his
you
memory.
have there is originally Tianara says no. She says, "Isn't it wonderful?" Well, no. And they actually had a complete back and forth between them that I just removed. You know,
Father
the point
never
is
would have.
she's
Tianara,
freaked
enough
out,
of this.
right?
You will not dishonor his memory.
So I just
That is
wanted to
all.
get her done and move on. Okay, so let's keep moving here. What do we have here?
Prince Vespar is to be betrothed to Tianara.
Okay. Who's Tianara?
So we'll jump ahead to this here.
Carliana's daughter.
Okay, so this is what I've been working on the last day and a half, I would say. And so all of this stuff has been punched up visually in a big way. There's obviously also some editing. So I'll just let this part roll for a bit. Hey, Mar.
Oh my, aren't you the
So,
lucky
you know,
one?
cast shadows, the
This is outrageous!
that shot, I actually did that shot last night. That's a completely new shot that I added.
My,
in.
aren't you the lucky one?
That's new.
This is outrageous!
That's new.
Oh, spare me. You ought to show your mother a little appreciation. You've been promised to Prince Vespar, and to Prince Vespar you shall be wed today. Get over it. I apologize for the chains. It was necessary.
I am here, Lord.
So yeah, and this shot, what I had a problem because the lighting effect here. Okay, I mean I love the cast shadow from the bars on the window and stuff. The problem was that if you look at the lighting situation here to here, for reasons I won't bore you with, it would have been enormously difficult to get these to match. So I'm like, I got to do something. So I thought, well, Phallus shows up. Why don't we just cut to a close-up of Phallus? So now with what I did, and this was done today in about 20 minutes. This whole shot, this is kind of an amazing shot if you think about it, because this is a, well, it's only 3 seconds, but the whole thing was done in 20 minutes, start to finish, lip sync and all. And the way I did it was I went to one of these later shots where we had the walls in there, and I had the close-up of her right there. And so I just completely repositioned and repurposed her to show her coming into the room and then saying the line of dialogue, which used to be a long wide shot where Golik was still in the shot, but I needed to be able to interrupt these two shots, break them up with something. And frankly, it plays better with the close-up.
It was necessary.
Oh, that's another thing. I also took Liquify here in Krita. After something no one noticed, and all the time anybody's looked at the show, no one has noticed that Golik took the chains off of Tianara, and then in the very next shot right here, her hands were up here in the frame with the chains on them. And those sorts of continuities, you'd be amazed how many the people don't. You would think they'd catch this stuff, but they don't. And I didn't catch it. Valerie didn't catch it. You guys didn't catch it. Nobody that's watched the show has caught that mistake.
I apologize for the chains.
So I removed the chains.
It was necessary.
And then here's the problem. This is a big, big, big problem. Through this whole section, I thought it was going to play better if she was standing up. Well, the problem is this whole second section with Phallus, she's sitting down. Well, what do we do? This is a really serious, not a small problem. Well, my solution was this. After he takes the chains off her, and Phallus comes into the shot, so I guess we're back here. The solution was, after he releases her and the chains are gone, where is it? Here it is. I said, okay. He releases the chains, and she's kind of downtrodden, so I'm like, okay, we'll just accept the idea that she just kind of falls out of the frame like that, right? So she kind of falls down onto her knees while he backs away from her. Now, you could debate whether that's the best choice in the world, but the good news was it took like 2 applications of the Liquify tool in Krita to take her from this down to this, and then boom, it cuts away, right? So
The
now
chains.
we got her back down on her
It
butt
was
again.
necessary.
And plus you got this rapid fire editing going on that kind of hides, where you're not going to really think too hard about any of the little details, right?
I apologize for the chains.
But having the chains in there again
Was
right there was
necessary.
not good. So, got rid of those.
I am here, Lord.
Ah. Attend to the prince's bride
So
to
you guys
be.
get the idea. This is, it is truly, I mean, I say as a filmmaker, if I was critiquing someone else's work, I would say definitely this is vastly improved. I mean, it's just a much, much tighter edit, as Ross said. So anyway, now what we're into is from here on, I'm going to put a marker, because from here on, we really need to think about this color cast that's affecting all these shots, because from here on, it's not there. Right? So we're going to have to... some things are good, though. I mean, we have her... This shot, which is a fairly old shot, we already had the cast shadows from the bars. So there's some stuff in this sequence that is a little bit better from a production value standpoint. Here, the gradient's already there. This shot, frankly, kind of set the standard for really how a lot of these
I was
shots probably
sold
should have looked.
into the king's service when I was just a little girl.
Sold?
Oh, yes.
Again, great example of, before she sat down and then there was just like a half a second of just stuff here, in between. So I'm like, screw that, let's get rid of it. Down and up, go.
Oh, yes.
Go, go, go. This is what we want.
You might as well look at the bright side.
Look at all these
To
chops.
marry the
Look
prince.
at all these cuts.
It's quite an opportunity.
That's what everyone says.
It's go, go, go.
My freedom for their opportunity.
And yours. Do you understand that one day you'll be queen? I thought not.
Yeah, this is
Then
so much
you
faster
can fix
now.
all the ills that plague the kingdom.
No, thank you.
It has been decided.
Okay, yeah, and there's an error there. Well, she's forward. Let me think about this.
Thank you.
It has been decided.
No, I guess that's okay. I guess that's actually correct. Okay, so where are we at? Chop, chop, chop. I guess we're close to the end of the show. So anyway, we get to the end, and we are at 24 minutes and 37 seconds. So we're talking about this show at this point, this episode has 2.5 minutes removed. That's a lot. But I love it. I love it. Okay, so I said in the description on the in the Discord, I was going to kind of show what I've learned. This is what I'm gonna just kind of show what I feel like I've been learning about animation that you guys may find helpful. I don't think it matters. It doesn't really matter whether we're using Tahoma or Krita. So I'm in Krita. I don't think it matters much. For the most part, the principles apply, but this is just like a workflow thing. So I had kind of an agenda in mind of what I wanted to talk about in terms of what I've learned. So let me just kind of run with this for a minute. And number one, as animators, we do tend to want to start with motion because we want to act. And by the way, Maria says, Dave, now no rush on my end. For the re-recording, can you shoot over the latest audio with all the cuts and such so I can echo as accurately as I can? Let me think about that for a minute. Let me stick a pin in that one. Number one, I'm not at all sure that that's necessary. Well, I guess it is because you don't have the reference of the. You'd have to look at the webisode. So, okay, yeah. Like I said, we'll stick a pin in that. I'll get something to you. Let me put that on my to-do list right now. Add a task. Get updated audio looping reference to Maria. Okay, cool. And and if I think of anything that maybe could be added or done differently, I'll let you know. But my suspicion is, at this point, I will say that it's probably good enough, but I would like to hear it with the better microphone situation. I would like to hear it and see what we get. So anyway, so this is what I think I've learned. Number one, if you're going to start with motion and acting, do like Ed Tadeo does and keep it very loose and very just figure out the acting. Don't get bogged down. I think a mistake I've made is to get bogged down in rendering, if you will, details way prematurely. So don't do that. Keep it loose. And what I'm actually showing right here exemplifies my next point. So let's say you sort of figure out your timing. The hilarious thing about what I'm sharing here is that it's probably the kind of thing you're never going to hear from the teachers, on AMB Animation Academy, or not to pick on him or anything, but I mean, this is not the 12 principles of animation. This is not how to do a walk cycle. This is, you're trying to create something, damn it. You're trying to create a show. You're trying to create characters that people grab, and you have this massive amount of work to do. What do you do? That's the question. Okay? So this step, and lately, the more I do it, the more I find I do it like this, where everything is very curvy and loose, and I don't think too much about the anatomy. I'm kind of doing what I call taking the Glenn Keane approach, where you just keep it all real loose. Okay? All right? And now, so I'm talking about the mental process here. Okay? The mental process is it's about, you want to feel something, right? So right now I'm drawing this character, and he seems to be leaning back, and he's making some sort of pronouncement. So what I feel, so the question you want to always be asking yourself is, what do I definitely feel versus what I'm not sure about? It's the old work from the known to the unknown idea. Okay? And the reason for that is that the things that you're pretty sure of tend to elucidate the things you're not sure of. Okay? And plus, you might find out you just made a mistake. You had an idea about how to make this move, or how to convey the attitude or the emotion or the action that your story demands, and you might have missed. Sometimes you just miss the mark. For me, the good news is this. It's funny, I just talking to Valerie about this, how a year ago it would often be the case that I would want to fix a shot up and I'd redo it, and manifestly the redo was no better and sometimes was worse than the original for a host of reasons. Sometimes it had to do with the ink work, it had to do with the rendering, like the acting might be better, but the actual execution of the drawings was worse. It's just, so the good news for me personally is that I don't tend to have those problems as much anymore. It does seem to be the case. So that would be a lesson for you guys, is there is no such thing as drawing too much, really. Especially if you have a cast of characters that you're working with where you have to draw them repeatedly, then it's really important to get to know them well enough that you don't even have to work very hard to nail the characterization. Because I've had way too many shots I've had to redo because characters were, off character. In fact, the whole sequence we just watched with TNR, where I did all the color work, the reason I approached that sequence was because when Valerie and I previewed the show, she commented that particularly in the early section part of that sequence, TNR was off character. So I'm like, well, I got to redo the shots anyway. I was able to fix the actual characterization mostly with a little bit of Liquify, just changing the shape. But anyway, my point, I have no organization here, so I'm going to elucidate the points as they occur to me. Keep the acting very, 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 very loose. And there's a key reason that has to do with tightening it up in ink and paint, why you want to keep it loose. You don't want to keep it loose because you're sloughing off drawing. You want to keep it loose because you want to remember that there is a next step that is very important. And the next step is to step back. If you've determined that the acting is working, okay, I say, okay, this acting is right. The next thing I want to do is I want to stop everything, take my right brain hat off, and put my left brain hat on. And now I want to think strategically and tactically about how I'm going to attack the scene in order to execute it both effectively and economically. Okay, so when I'll kind of share this little sort of psychobabble moment where when I looked at what I had to do on that sequence that I showed with TNR with all the color, believe me, friends, believe me, I was tweaked with, oh my God, it's just so much work. I got to redo, I hate having to do the same work over again. I felt all that, okay? But I stopped myself and got my eye back on the ball and also began to think tactically about how I could accomplish it without it really taking forever. All those shots that were redone it was all done in the last, it's not even a day's work to do it all, right? So you do need to know your tools. But anyway, let's stay on track because I'll lose my train of thought. So if you say, okay, what are the things that we as creators of entertainment want to stop and think about as we go through this process? Okay, the first thing, we're wearing our animator hat and we figured out that we've got this thing that we want to convey. Okay? And by the way, I'm going to make sure this is 8 frames per second so the whole thing doesn't blow by too fast. I'm very much used to working at 8 frames per second. So here's some guy, and he's making some happy pronouncement. Okay, so the next step for me is going to be just put on your cinematography hat. Have you fouled up the framing right out of the gate? Because in this case, I have. Look at it. He's too big in the frame, and he's hugging the right edge. Okay, so let's just fix that right now. There's more than one way to fix it. In Tahoma, you could hit the S key and make a selection, and you could then resize it, and then you just carefully go through those keyframes and resize everything. You could use the animate tool, but then you run the risk of, if you were to shrink this, that you're also going to cut off the edge of your frame, such that if you wanted to draw outside the frame, all of a sudden you have a problem. So in that case, in Tahoma or OpenTunes, you would have to scale your frame. You might actually have to make the frame larger if you're going to reduce its size with the animate tool. Makes sense? Because you're reducing the entire canvas of that particular level. In Krita, we can do it a little different way. And for a simple reframing situation like this, I would add a transform mask, hit the A key, and then I'm going to basically say, life rule about framing is that you want to always err on the side of smaller in frame than larger. Don't hug the edges, because there's just a host of reasons having to do with visual storytelling where I've learned the hard way. It's why the last 3 movies I've made, I shot with a wide lens. In fact, one of them I specifically, because it was a comedy, I specifically shot the whole movie with a 17-inch lens. I didn't even use any long lenses at all because I wanted to have that. If you guys don't know what I'm talking about, forgive me. There is a comedic feeling that you get from a short lens that you do not get from a long lens. When you watch CSI or one of these, those types of shows, forensic investigation type shows, where they've got a lot of rapid fire shots, they got a lot of really, really intense focus pulls. Those are usually done with long lenses, okay? So with a short lens, you're going to have a tendency more frequently to keep everything in focus all the time. You're not going for focal depth effects. But of course, I'm getting a little off the track. But the point here is that the framing, this is better framing. Okay, we want to kind of respect the rule of thirds. And now that I've done it, I'm going to go ahead and bake it in. So I'm going to actually flatten this layer so that the transform mask is baked in. And now another thing that comes to mind is flip your canvas a lot, because you literally can't see the things that are wrong until you flip the canvas. And or in this case, when I reframed it properly, I realized that there was a problem in drawing number 3. Okay, and so here, ostensibly, this guy's elbows are kind of tucked in pretty close to his body. Here you can sort of forgive it because they're moving out, but here, this is awful. That's not what I wanted. In fact, the likelihood, I don't know this to be true, but the likelihood is the reason I drew it like that is because I was hugging the frame. I was hugging the right edge, and so I had to draw it that way to make it fit, which is insane. You don't want to work that way. So just as a real broad principle, err on the side of loose framing. And then here, if we draw a line across here and assume that, you've got a little bit of perspective, but basically, we're still probably not framed that well. We're still probably actually a little too big. Okay? Maybe not too big, maybe just framed wrong. I would say the size is okay, but I'm going to actually redo this. Add a transform mask, and what I'm going to do is reframe this guy just a little bit there so that his head is kind of kissing the rule of thirds here. His hands are kind of kissing the rule of thirds here. And that's a pretty reasonably well framed shot. Okay? So flatten that layer. Okay, so do you bake as you go, or do you embrace the idea of really wanting to have a procedural workflow? And the rule is, or the lesson I've learned is, it's both. For stuff that you definitely know, I'm making a change that is for sure, like that reframing I just did, I'm not going to rethink that. And the reason I know I'm not going to rethink that is because when I first drew it, I wasn't bearing the rule in mind. Okay? The rule being, in this case, just the rule of thirds. There's other frameworks you can use for organizing a composition, obviously, but and it doesn't have to be perfect, just the basic idea. Okay? The point is that I wasn't thinking about that when I drew it. I was thinking about the character. This is one of the biggest things we struggle with as animators, is we're thinking about acting. We're not thinking about the freaking camera, right? And so that's okay. We do it sequentially. We do these things in order, and if our tools allow us to deal with things in the right order, then we don't have to worry about it. If you're drawing in Blender, or if you like using vectors to sketch in OpenTunes, which I think pretty much nobody does, but if you did, then in those two cases, you have an infinite canvas anyway. So if you have an infinite canvas in your software, use it. Use it to your advantage, and you can actually solve the framing problem without any loss of resolution or anything like that. Okay? But anyway, so once I've thought about acting, for me, the next thing is probably going to be composition, because once I do ink and paint, I'm sort of committed to the resolution that I'm working at. if I'm committed to the resolution, I want to make sure I get the size of things basically right before I bake it down or commit. Okay? So for me, probably composition is going to be step 2. Now, step 3 is something you're not going to hear from anybody else ever. And at least I don't think so in the animation space, you know, here on YouTube, whatever. This, what I'm about to say, you're not going to hear from anybody else. And I don't think it makes me special or anything, but I think it's important because it's specifically the reason why the last shot I did of Follow was able to be done in 20 minutes. And it's a good shot. It's not a crappy shot. You know, it's good. And it fits. It works with the edit. There's dialogue, you know, lip sync. How can you do it that fast? You know, how is that possible? Well, because of the next thing I'm going to tell you guys. Once you're firm on your acting and you're firm on your composition, then think about 2 things. Number 1, really being as honest as you can be about the acting. Ask yourself, you know, think about the 2 things in this drawing that are clearly the most important: the head and the hands. Okay, and that's often the case. Like more than 3/4 of the time in any animated shot, what's going on with the head and the hands is the most important. Why? Because it actually leads the body language. The weight of your body is literally determined by what you're doing with your head and your hands, because your body has to compensate for the weight of your head and your hands. Okay? So in this case, the question you want to ask yourself is, number 1, what is rigid? I know, like I said, you're not going to hear that from anybody else. What is rigid here, as opposed to floppy or soft and squishy? And the truth is, heads are usually rigid. What does that mean in practice? Well, what it means is that there's a very good chance, it's not 100%, but there's a very good chance that I can steal the actual head that's going to go into the ink and paint from another shot that was already done, because frankly, more than half the time, you are dealing with a 3/4 view. I've had it happen a plethora of times where I've actually cut between shots and changed the framing where the person turned their head or something. And once you actually get it all in there and look at it, and then you toggle between the 2 shots, you realize that the actual change in the shape and direction of the head is like 10%, maybe 15%. Like what felt in the storytelling like a big change turns out to have not been a big change at all. And so it often turns out to be the case that I can steal this head from a different shot. I'm going to probably want to... Okay, so that actually, if you're going to follow that idea, then consider these 2 things. If you're into frame-by-frame animation, you're not going to want to get sidetracked into a rigging-based approach. We've talked about that many times here. But it is a really, really important point, because once you kind of know what your acting is doing, like this is very loose, it's very sketchy. Once you know what you're trying to say with your scene, if you're normal, you're gonna begin to think, well, geez, you know, I'm gonna reuse this head from this other shot that I did, let's say. Now you might not, because you say, well, I actually want here. The head, you know, it's kind of going from this to this to this, isn't it? Right? That is true. The question you have to ask yourself, though, is that a bit of an illusion that we'll find out if we got some reuse out of the head that it wouldn't matter? Okay? How might that happen? Well, probably by going... I'm going to go Control-Shift-V and move this head over here, and I'm actually going to steal it from there. So it's in a different position. So I can go to this frame. I'm going to go Control-Shift-V. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, I'm going to assume I'm wrong. Okay? I'm going to assume that from the vantage point of the audience who only cares about the story, that don't care about animation, that's meaningless, all they care about is the story. What is meaningful to them? To them, is this just as good as this? Well, we know it's a one frame tween, so that alone means the answer is definitely yes in this case, because it's a one frame tween. But then this is where I was talking about thinking tactically. Here, Control-Shift-V, if I go like this, does it turn out that maybe this works in and of itself, but with some very minor changes where I actually just take the face and make just a little tiny change to it. And I might even actually, in the case of Krita, use Liquify so that I can kind of pull this up a bit and this down a little bit or something like that. Okay, you want to, if you're going to try to take on a really, really, really big project and you don't think about these things and accept the fact that the audience doesn't care, and then be as honest as you can be about whether in fact it actually is just as good, then you're stupid, because you're going to waste, not to take anything away from the value of doing the drawing and learning to be really good at frame by frame animation. Okay, I don't want to take anything away from that. Of course, if you enjoy doing it and you know you think it matters, then of course do it. But I'll venture to say with some confidence that what you're going to discover is that way more than half the time it turns out that all that extra drawing was for nothing. In fact, if you're a marginal artist, if your drawing or your ability to stay on character isn't that great, you actually are introducing a very real chance that you're going to ruin your scene or make it worse because you didn't do a good job of drawing that character in three-dimensional space. The hardest thing that we do, in my opinion, as animators, is this. You take a head, and now you have to take that head and you have to move it around in 3D space. Okay, and let's not make it too easy. So let's say it also has to move up or down. Okay, so there's the mouth, maybe. You know, mouth down here, mouth a little higher, mouth a little higher. Okay, this is the hardest thing to do. And so another point that would be worth making here is that if you've got these characters that you're going to be reusing over and over, why not take the time to think about what their structure is? So in my case, I know that Asher is a circle and then basically a shape kind of like this with some jutting. Okay, so I know the core geometric reality of that character. Okay, I'm drawing it kind of small. He's got a crook in his nose, and his mouth kind of goes like this. And then he's got pretty big ears. You know, Golik, I know, zoom in a little bit. Golik, I know, is a circle sitting on top of a cylinder, basically. Okay, I know that his eyes tend to angle like this, and that he has bags above and below. And the basic proportion, you know, his eyes are halfway down, and then you could split that and you get his nose, and then you have to find a place for his mouth, and then he's got the goatee, right? So, and I'm not saying I do the best job ever of doing this, okay? That's why I'm sharing what I've learned, is because I've made so many mistakes. But knowing what the real base rigid geometry of your character, especially their head, is time well spent. Okay? Because I know I could take that sketch right there, and I might have to make a couple little corrections, but basically I know that I could craft that into a good drawing of Golik. I know I could do it. Okay. See you, Ross. Okay, and Amar's just echoing my sentiment about when you're figuring out the acting, keep it really loose. You know, if you don't want to be, it doesn't have to be floppy. I mean, obviously, I used to actually talk quite a bit about sticks and balls, and there's a lot of merit to sticks and balls, which means Because what sticks and balls do for you is it keeps the proportions rigid. Okay? Richard Williams really makes this point well in his book, The Animator's Survival Kit, that squash and stretch is grossly overrated. Like, really overrated. Good motion is way more important than squash and stretch. And plus, you can always add squash and stretch anyway by just stretching things around. But what sticks and balls do for you is it allows you to basically draw an arc. Okay, so let's put the blue on here. So I can draw this arc like this. I can draw an arc around an axle, as it were. And I know with great confidence that I can draw this arm moving up here, and I can be sure that it's going to be the right length. Now, if you want to cheat, then cheat by all means. If you're trying to figure out the animation, grab this guy like this, go and sorry about that, and make a copy of it and just go like this. If you're trying, if it's an arm that's trying to go like this, then cheat. And then if you want to, you can also sit there in real time and just play around with other things you might want to do with it. Right? So that brings up another point I've learned, is that if you're having to deal with complex motion, I've learned this in two ways. One is by working stuff out on paper. It's almost scary how if I work something out on paper first, which forces me to think about things like how long is this going to take, right? So I don't do it like strictly the way you see in books, where you block in timing and then you do your easing. I don't do that, okay? But to either map it out on paper, or in this case, what's going to happen here, actually, if you were timing this out, let's just kind of draw a line here. You can draw a parallel line between these two balls so that you can sort of get the spacing. Okay. So in this case, you got an arm that comes up and then flies out, right? So you actually have 2 dimensions of movement here that you're trying to puzzle out. Okay? There's the movement up on this angle, and then of course the arm comes up, but then the arm whips out. So this is also going like this, isn't it? Right? To get around to here. Well, how long does that take? In time, well, it's probably half a second. It's pretty quick. But my point about digital tools is that it's really easy to just grab something, make sure you've got the anchor point in the right place, but then just play with it. Just play with what feels good, right? So the one of the alternatives to working it out on paper, and then I found it's quite useful, because it forces me to really think about, okay, this is going to be 1 frame, so I might just put 1 there, and then I might do this over 2 frames. Although if an arm was moving this quickly and whipping out like that, this would probably actually be 1 frame as well. So this is at 8 frames per second, especially. This whole thing is 3 frames. It's a quick move. Now, in practice, what would actually happen in the show would be the same thing I did here, where you'd have the first shot, and the first shot would rest for 1, 2, 3 frames, and then you'd have shots 2 and 3, or drawings 2 and 3. Why? Because it's the principle of what I call snap and hold, and it's something that really, really helped me work with actors on a live movie set. I've talked about this before, but when you get an actor to think about everything they're doing, think about their body from the standpoint of what I call a one-dimensional sequence, the thing that emerges is that you are thinking about the holds, because that's the only time the audience has time to digest what the heck they're seeing. So you need that first pose, which is this arm here, to be on the screen for a few frames, and then you have the motion. So it's a hold and then it's a pop, okay? And what I found is not only does that basically save your bacon on 8 frame per second animation, but it also is a great starting point for 12 or 24 per second frame per second animation, because the principles hold true, and really all you're doing is just maybe you're adding easing or you are adding tweens to smooth it out, but the basic overlapping action, Tom, good question. You know what, from the standpoint of sort of like the 12 principles of animation, I don't remember if overlapping action is one of them. I think it is. And my answer would be that I'm not sure. I neither know nor care. And I'll tell you why. As an editor, because I don't think just as an animator, I think as an editor, and I think as a visual storyteller, not so much an animator. And so without, I could be speaking out of turn here, but my general guess would be that the whole principle of overlapping action is kind of badly overrated. Because what it probably turns out is that in practice, what you really want is that one-dimensional sequence. And then overlapping action becomes a side effect of editing. Okay, let me explain that one more time. Okay, in other words, I've got a guy whose head turns, let's say, from a front angle to a profile. Okay, so we'll just do a simple drawing here. So this guy turns from here to a profile. So I know that that's going to happen. Okay, number two, we also know that he's got this thing that happens with his arm where it jerks up and then it whips out. Okay, in your animation software, if you were to you know, it gets into some of the problems you face with digital tools, because if everything's baked into a single frame, then what I'm describing here becomes a little more difficult. My basic contention as a visual storyteller is this. If these are both important, if this is important and this is important, then it's generally better if they happen in sequence. But if you do them in sequence and then find out that it looks a little cheeseball, what you're actually dealing with at that moment is the same thing that I deal with when I'm editing, which is that you have stuff that's just simply spread out too long and it just feels cheesy. And by overlapping them, it feels better. Okay? And I would generally say that sometimes you can figure that out at that early stage when you're just dealing with the acting, and sometimes you don't figure it out till later. And so if I had to make a bet on one approach or the other, I'm always going to favor a sequence. And then I'm going to look at overlapping action as an editing function, not an animation function. The animation function is the turn of the head and the bending of the arm. That's animating. Okay? So what happens is you have this loop. You're going from acting, which is what we have there with the guy throwing his, you know, whatever pronouncement he's making. You're going from acting to animating, which for me is more cerebral, it's more logical, it's more tactical, and then it's looping back to acting. Because you started out with this loosey-goosey thing where you're figuring out what the acting is, but then you have to stop and go back and look at it tactically. And that's why I asked the question, what's rigid? Why did I ask that question? Because the stuff that's rigid, you can often draw one time and then just use your digital tools to move it around. Think about it. That's precisely why the whole concept of shift and trace exists in OpenTunes. Why is the shift and trace tool there, and to a lesser extent onion skins? Because the whole idea was that Glenn Keane tightened up his drawing of Ariel, and he presumably he tightened it up to the key drawing, and then he said, you know what, this is stupid. I'm not going to redraw that again. On my light table, I'm going to pick up the paper, move it to a different position, and trace it. In effect, he was doing exactly the same thing with digital tools when we just go like this. I'm on the wrong layer. When I go like this, and by the way, that's another tip I would give people. is if you're trying to figure out how your acting is going to work, just set the center point of a rotation or a translation where it needs to be, like the base of his skull here, and just move it around. Just play with it and see what feels good. If it feels good moving it in real time, then you can be sure it's going to feel good animated. Okay? And if it doesn't feel good moving around in real time, then it's maybe more likely that the animation, in other words, it's the difference between, am I going to move it or is the computer going to move it? It doesn't matter. The question you should be asking yourself is, does the motion feel good? You with me? So Amar's weighing in with his insight. You may apply some of it in your approach. You're doing is not focused on displaying your knowledge of animation. Let me read that again. You may apply some of it, but the approach you are doing is not focused on displaying your knowledge of animation. You are telling your story using animation as a method of delivery. I think that's a fair way to describe it. I think that's why I wanted to share kind of what I've learned, is because when you're dealing, and I've kind of said this at other times, when you approach a project like this from the vantage point of an employer, where you're paying everybody to do the job, of course there are climates, the Blender Foundation or Pixar, where there's a certain amount of research and development that's baked into the process of storytelling, and the reason they're telling stories is to, provide proofs of concept for software tools and things like that. So there's places where the artistry of it is literally the only thing that matters. Okay, but in the real world, and certainly you see it in the massive Japanese anime industry, in the real world that's not the case. In the real world, there's somebody that's paying the bills that's saying, what's the sweet spot between the best storytelling and the least work? And in fact, the entire aesthetic of anime, I believe, just stems from that. That's why anime is what it is because they had to figure out ways to crank out large volumes of product economically, And so, in terms of practical questions you ask in that cerebral, tactical process, one of the first questions I've been finding myself asking over and over again is, what is rigid? Because whatever's rigid, I probably can draw one time. And then I either use animation tools, which potentially gets you into rigging, different layers, the plastic tool, okay? There's a middle ground, though, that I have never seen anyone describe, and I'm going to describe it now. There is a middle ground between a rigged approach, if you don't want to get into the purely cerebral approach to animation, which of course it becomes more creative once the rig's all created. But until you've got the rig ready to go, you have a lot of work to do to come up with something that can really give you reuse. We've seen that over and over. And in my experience, it almost always backfires, actually. For two reasons. Number one, the rig doesn't work that well, so the animation winds up being subpar in some way. Number two, you spend a lot of time creating a rig, and the very freaking first shot you work on turns out to be the exception to the rule where the rig doesn't quite work. Okay? So what's that middle ground? It goes along with this idea of asking yourself, what is rigid? And I did it with my animation, I think, of the old blind guy the other day. What you do, and I've never heard anybody explain this. What you do is you say, okay, I know his head is rigid, and maybe in this case, not for sure, but maybe in this case his hands are rigid. So what I recommend is, if you've done a floppy, sketchy drawing to block out and you know how things are going to move, then what I recommend is don't connect the parts. Go ahead, and I've done it sometimes where I've actually, this came up recently. I'm going to darken this a bit so that I can put another layer over top of it. But this came up recently, and I didn't know that it was going to be useful, but it turned out it was in the ink and paint stage. What I did was, and by the way, I'm going to go ahead and let me pin all these layers to the timeline so we can see where the keyframes are. So if we were going to ink and paint now, and by the way, to be clear, I am skipping the step of a rigorous drawing. Okay, don't do that. You're not good enough, and neither am I. We're not good enough to go from the loosey-goosey sketch to ink. Okay? Let me say it again. You are not good enough to go from loosey-goosey sketch, which is all about acting and movement and emotion, to go from that to inking. You're not good enough. Don't do it. Don't try it. It's not worth it. You're just going to make mistakes, and your drawings are going to wind up, you're going to have final ink drawings that suck. I promise you, I've done it. And you don't want to suck. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just quickly put in the keyframes. Putting in all the keyframes took me 1 minute. I can still cut and paste from one to the other. So if I'm going to do the ink, what I was getting around to is this. Parenthetically, do the intermediate step. Okay? So I'm gonna say, as a pencil test, I'm gonna go ahead and do the intermediate step where I draw this character properly. I'll go ahead and give him the dot eyes. So he's kind of like a Tintin type guy or something, I guess. But I'm gonna draw this character. But take the time to flip the canvas. Make sure. See right there, by flipping the canvas, I could see that the weight of his hair needed to come out here like that. Now this looks pretty good. A moment ago it didn't. Because his head felt like it was falling off to one side. Flipping the canvas is invaluable for that. Okay, so now take the time to tighten up the drawing. You could do it on the pencil test layer if you wanted to. You could add a third layer for a tighter pencil test. But it's worth doing because you may well only have to do it once, right? Say, hey, Blifton. So I'm going to go ahead and just make this character, okay? So now, if you want to get maximum mileage out of minimum work, especially in limited animation, and you were going to put, you know, we don't want to go with a rig. We're not trying to create a rig. And in Krita, we really can't anyway. But what we do want to do is think intelligently about what layers might we want to kind of keep in our hip pocket in order to, what's the most bang for your buck in acting for the least cost. And there's basically two. The mouth and the eyebrows. To a lesser extent, the eyes themselves. In this case, his eyes are dots, so we'll go with it. But let me switch to my eraser. But in other words, if you're gonna attack a shot and try to guess in advance where you might want to just leave things on a separate layer, the two things for me would be eyebrows and the mouth. But especially eyebrows. I've gotten more mileage out of eyebrows and blinks recently than you can shake a stick at. Here's why. If I go Control Insert here and make this a keyframe, so we know what's going to happen here. Number one, we're probably going to be able to reuse the head. We already figured that out. Okay, so we've got this moment before he moves. Where are we going to do anything with that? And I'm going to say, well, what if we go ahead and give it 2 frames and just see what we can do here in terms of adding some character, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, let's do 1 down, 1 up. And in this case, I'm going to go ahead and squish this down a little more, like inquisitively. Okay? Having the eyebrows on a separate layer often turns out to be a big win. Now, what do we do here? Well, in this case, we already figured out the head was rigid, right? So, I'm going to just go ahead and just follow the plan. And in this case, what I'll do is select this. Now, I'm assuming, you know, I'm not doing a proper ink step here, obviously. So, Control-Shift-V. Okay, so again, like I said, just lessons I've learned is you really want to ask yourself, as honest as you can be, is does it turn out that without redrawing that head 3 times, does it turn out that this is good enough, that this is just as good? And I'm going to argue that it is in this case, okay? It's not all, whoops, that's the wrong layer. It's not always, doesn't always turn out to be the case, but the point is that it often does. And here, the question now becomes, well, are we going to do any more with the eyebrows? And well, why not? We can. So if he's excited and he's sharing some valuable information that people are going to get really thrilled about, maybe he's, you know. So we have this change in characterization, right? And so then we wind up with blomp. Okay, so now, to be honest, the initial great example of overlapping action, actually, Tom, I'm glad I did this because this circles back to your question in a really elegant way, which is this. Again, tactically, I have to ask myself this question. Does this little bit with the eyebrows, and I'm going to turn the sketch off. Okay, the question you got to ask yourself now is, does this matter? Did it matter? Because of overlapping action, it's wasted. You don't even see it. So if that change in characterization which says, ooh, I'm thinking about something like, what's going on here or whatever, you know, if that matters, then this timing is wrong. Clearly. If this matters, then this needs to be downstream so that our audience, and I'm even going to move this down 2 frames, so that our audience can digest it, and then he moves. And as you can see, the timing's even worse. It actually needs to be even further downstream. So everything right now in terms of overlapping action actually hinges on this simple question. Does the eyebrow thing matter? Now, as an animator, how many times you guys have you been in a situation where you did something like we had here a moment ago, where the eyebrows moved, and then we had the move with the head, and your gut told you this is wrong. This is wrong. And the reason it's wrong is because it doesn't feel right anymore. The acting is lost. I don't see the motion in the eyebrows because it all goes by and now he's on the move and we never get to digest it. But you keep it anyway because you did the work and you don't want to throw it away. Here you only have 2 choices. Either you let the audience enjoy that bit of acting like that and then do the move, or you get rid of the bit of acting. Take your pick, but it's got to be one or the other. Otherwise, you're really harming your shot because you've got all this motion. It's like it subconsciously your audience is going, what just happened? Like something happened. I don't even know what it was. It's like boom. It just kind of went by. So you got to make that decision. And in this case, the decision's going to be yes, the acting matters. Well, if the acting matters, then the rest of the acting needs to be thrown downstream a bit. Okay? And these are just choices you make as you go that you just sort of have to discover what's going on. And it could turn out that by moving this downstream like that, that after his eyebrows go up, let me see something here. Okay, so I'm seeing something else that I think is interesting. So I'm going, well, if the acting in the eyebrows is good, maybe there is a place for some overlapping action here that I hadn't considered. I'm going to put all this in a group so that so that I can work on all the groups as a unit. Okay? And I'm going to do a free transform here. Well, actually, I think I'm going to do a liquify. Make it really, really big because what I'm feeling here is that once he I guess I need to refill the cache. Once he goes like that, I'm just feeling a little shift in body weight. Very subtle. It could happen with the eye thing. This is where you're going to have overlapping action. Why don't we make it 1 frame of it? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and shift his body weight a little bit. The Liquify Tool is hard to control right now, so that's why it looks a little bit hokey. And then I'm going to go ahead and add another bit afterwards. Okay? Now, again, I'm kind of fighting with the Liquify Tool a little bit, but let's just see how that feels. Boom. Yeah, see? Okay. So now you have overlapping action, but I discovered the overlapping action. I didn't know in advance that that was what I was going to do. I didn't know. What I did know was I wanted that little eyebrow thing where he's like, what's going on here? And so there's stuff that you know, and then there's stuff that you discover. And this is true, and I could get philosophical here because it's true in all aspects of life. If you try too hard to predict what's going to work, you're either never going to get anything done, or you're going to be a doe in headlights that's always freezing in your tracks and are afraid to fail. There's a whole host of things that go wrong that have to do with trying to be too predictive in your approach to life and your approach to animation. Don't do it. Flow with it, right? Just try stuff. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Now, here is the whole thing going to break because his whole body weight was shifted to here, but yet here we're back to the original position. It turns out, guess what? Coincidence of coincidences. It turns out, boop, it didn't matter. It didn't matter. And now look what we have. We'll crank this back up so you can see it. Actually, is that the right one? No, that's the wrong layer. You silly goose. It's this one. Okay. So now here's what we have. Shift, bump, shift, bump. But the important thing is, and by the way, the secret that I was going to tell earlier that I never told when I was going to get into the ink part was this. Animate the stuff that you know is going to be animated, and especially if you're like me where like in the case of this head, it would be completely like me to not only draw that rigid head, but also to go ahead and want to put the color in there, put in the ink, and so that I have a finished frame, because I know I'm going to reuse it. So I may want to actually bake the color and everything into the excuse me, I'm like belching in you guys' ears here. Bake it into the drawing. And that's fine. The thing that I discovered kind of recently-ish that I found quite useful was this. Just let me see. When you do your ink and paint, so let me go ahead and put in a little example of this here. Okay, so I'm going to switch brushes, go to black here. Okay, so let's say I'm just going to give this guy a simple garment. Okay, there's his arm and hand, and I'm just going to draw a real simple hand because I'm in a hurry. Okay, so let's pretend I took more time to do that. If this hand, like the head, obviously hands aren't normally rigid, but in this case I'm saying maybe if we looked at all the motion in this shot, look at this hand here. Let's test this. Okay, I'm gonna do a little better job of this, and we'll test it. I'll tell you the secret right now. The secret I'm getting around to, just so for those of you who are wondering, is this: break your characters. Do the stuff you know that's rigid, and leave the character broken, so that you can do your ink and paint and get everything blocked in and animated, and then just go in and repair it. Basically connect the dots like that. What I found is that can be a really effective way to just be able to really charge ahead. And what you find is that sometimes the appendages, you sort of discover where they need to be based. Like how do I know where my elbow is? I could try to draw an arm with an elbow, and then what you're going to do And I know, I'm not going to name any names, but I know there's some of you guys right here, right now that struggle with this, where you say, if this is the guy's arm, and then he's turning in space, and then when you turn it in space, what happens is you wind up with something like this happening, where the actual entire size of the arm changes, and the dimension of the appendages, like everything changes, it just evolves, especially if you're trying to draw it three-dimensionally. So you're trying to draw the thickness of the arm too. Right? And so then you wind up going from something like this to something like this. It just, I can't even do it wrong as well as I want to, because I'm just kind of sort of past that problem for the most part. And by the way, the key to it is to draw through the character. Actually draw the cylinders and draw through the character. But what I'm getting around to is that the stuff that you're sure of, like the hand in this case, tells you where the rest of the body needs to go, right? You could kill yourself trying to make sure you put the elbow in the right place, and you know, the biomechanics of it. You could really work hard to try to learn to draw that well, even foreshortened. It's all good. But what I'm saying is, if you know where the hand has to be, and that's the thing that's certain, then the position of the hand will tell you where the elbow, for example, would have to be in order for the hand to be where it is. It's the hand that's leading the motion, though, right? So anyway, let me just do a better job on this little bit here. I'm going to draw a thumb out like that, and the hand, I'm just going to kind of do it the way I often do it, as a silhouette. Okay, it's a cartoon hand. We're not going to knock ourselves out here. But let's say that's the hand. Now watch this. When he makes his pronouncement, his hands are out, right? They're in this position. They're way out. But look at this. I will bet you $1 that we're going to discover. Look at this. It's the same hand. It's almost exactly the same hand, and I didn't even realize it, because when I was sketching it, I really thought it wasn't gonna be. Okay, so now here, Control Shift V. Let's put this here, but now we're gonna just, again, we're not gonna rotate it in 3D space. Whoops. Let me hit the undo key. Control C. Okay, now watch this one. Now the question is, well, can we get that bit of reuse here as well? And the answer is maybe, maybe not. It just depends. You're talking about a hand, and by the way, the hand is actually a little bit too big, but you're talking about something that's a one-frame tween. This goes by really, really quick. You've got to ask yourself, does it matter? And by the way, I don't want to use this as an excuse to be sloppy on your quality control, but I'll tell you this. I've been rewatching Avatar: The Last Airbender. Okay? Guys, there's a lot of problems in that show. A lot of problems. If you're going to get picky about stuff like, well, you know, you're just reusing the same hand, or that's not exactly the position it would be in, or the anatomy's not quite what it should be. Oh my gosh, if you look, it's not that we want to excuse it, but if you look in the first season of Avatar, maybe it got better in season 2, I don't remember because I haven't watched it in a while, but if you look at how Sokka's, in particular, Sokka's characterization changed, depending on who was drawing him that day, and depending on the episode, it's shocking, actually, to go back and watch it and realize how all over the map the characterization of that, and also what's her name, Katara, Katara as well, same thing. The characterization on that show was all over the place. What's the point? The point is nobody cared. Because it's the acting, it's the story, it's the context that matters. It's the drawings working with the voices, with the music, with the story, with the plot, with the color, with the framing. All these things working together is what the audience experience, and they're willing to forgive little details if the total package is working together well. This is why I've been taking as much time as I've been taking on this editing. You know, we're talking about a show that's had 2.5 minutes cut out of it just in the last 2 days. Because what I want the total experience of watching it to just suck you through. It just pulls you through the story, right? It isn't about animation. Animation's important, but it's not about animation. It's about storytelling. So in this case, obviously, we've got a bit of an issue here. So I'm going to tell you what, I'm going to go here. I'm going to make this adjustment. And now, by the way, because I haven't connected the dots yet, I actually have the opportunity to make a little bit of a creative choice. For example, when his body weight shifts, maybe his hand doesn't keep moving in the same direction as the rest of his body. Maybe what the hand does is it just actually stays in the same place but just kind of rotates up. Right? So I'm discovering. And so now let's just see what we've got. See that? And that's kind of natural. I mean, it's just one way. There's 50 ways you could do it. And that's the point. The point is that all 50 ways you can do it are pretty much just as good as one another. And if you get too hung up on trying to find the right way, you're kind of, as I like to say sometimes, you're kind of pissing in the wind. Because the truth is, it really just doesn't matter that much. As long as you're being pulled through the story. So he's saying, hey, wait a sec. Hey, wait a sec. And then he's announcing something. I don't know what he's announcing. Hey, wait a sec. Free beer for everyone. Right? So, and these principles, by the way, a lot of you guys, some of you who don't consider yourselves that great at drawing, will consider this. It may be true that I am pursuing, and this would probably be a good place to wrap up this session, actually. It's true that I'm pursuing a traditional distribution path. Okay, so I'm trying to create a finished show for a traditional marketplace. But that's just one idea. Okay? If you take just what I've covered here, you say, well, I can't draw. Well, okay. This character doesn't require you to be able to draw well. Okay? So it turns out that the drawing isn't what matters, is it? What are kids watching? Okay? Kids aren't watching cable TV, that's for sure. They are doing platforms, but basically, how are kids wasting their time these days? Well, they're looking at TikTok. Or they're looking at YouTube shorts, right? So any of you guys, at any time, can take your very limited skills and apply some of these very simple principles. And if you do that, this is where it becomes very sort of democratic, and you can't hide from the truth of whatever it is you're trying to pursue in your aspirations as an animator. If I'm right, and it's true that if you follow these principles, you have the tools in your toolkit to create something entertaining. Well, then the problem becomes, now it's all about you. Are you going to create something entertaining, or are you just going to, piss away another month of your life? Poking at the 12 principles of animation, or worse, sticking your nose up in the air and having that conceit that if people don't respect these principles or those principles, that, that's not good animation. Which is fine. If you want to have that conceit, you can. I mean, that's why sometimes I pick on AMB. I actually think, AMB animation is a great example of somebody who's really a pretty good animator. He's not amazing, but he's pretty good. And he's chosen a niche where he does have that conceit, where he says, this is what's important and this is what matters. And he has a right to do that because, by gum, it's his channel. And I respect that. And there's nothing he's teaching is bad. A lot of people could learn a lot from that guy. And there's other people as well. But my point is that these very simple tools in your toolkit if you accept them and you learn them, and none of them are particularly hard, none of them are required to be that great at animation or, anatomy or drawing characters' face. None of those required. None of that is required. So in other words, you look in the mirror and you say, okay, the tools are already in my toolkit. Well, I guess that means it's all up to me. And now you start to think pragmatically, as I kind of said earlier. You start to think strategically or tactically. You say, well, it's not about the software. It's not even about my ability to draw or quote-unquote animate. What is it about? It's about the idea. It's about communicating. It's about how you convey emotion and story. And in the case of TikTok or something, probably comedy. Can you do that? Can you do that can you create a 30-second animation that genuinely entertains people? Because even though it's a bunch of freaking stick figures, for example, might not be, but it could be, just stick figures. The only thing that matters is, does it entertain? And if it does, well, you're in the club. And you're doing better than me because you're maybe putting something on TikTok and, it gets 15,000 views or, or 500,000 or whatever. And that's great. Oh, and obviously to each his own. Some people, that's what they want to pursue, and I respect that. And some people do like Darren does, where he's really more about educating people. Yeah, he's trying to become a good animator. He's always trying to draw a little better, whatever. But he is about educating. I'm about telling traditional stories in a traditional format. And that's just because that's the challenge that's interesting to me, and that's why I'm such a crappy YouTuber. I'm a horrible YouTuber. Nobody comes here. Why? Well, because my content's not that interesting. It's just not. It is to a very select number of people who are also creatives who want to be either encouraged or inspired, or to probably the least degree educated about how to do whatever it is they're trying to do, or whatever, or they're trying to formulate what they want to do. But anyway, long story short is, I think that what I've covered here gets you started. Maybe a recap. Start out, if you're working out acting and motion, keep it loose. Don't try to draw the characters well. Take a lesson from Ed Tadeo on that point. That's what Ed does. He keeps it very loose. He figures out what the character's going to do before he thinks about how the character's supposed to look. Okay? That's number one. Number two, follow the basic rules that are time-tested and proven, like the rule of thirds and, compositionally, the things that we as a culture have come to be accustomed to, that we expect. And it's probably one of the biggest violations in my show, by the way, is violation of basic composition, not being quite as tight as it should be. Number three, think strategically about what it is you're animating that is rigid. In other words, that could be drawn only one time and then just moved around the frame, and it still works. Think about that. And then number four, I would say the best way to generalize number four would be use the known to discover the unknown. Allow yourself to discover. So I in this case, I knew what I wanted to do with his hands. I had a rough idea on the loose action of his body and his head. And the things I discovered along the way were that little bit of acting with his eyebrows, and I discovered that little turn, the shift of the body weight, and then the turn of the hand that reacts actually to that body weight. That was a discovery. That wasn't planned. So allow yourself a little room for discovery. And then, do the hard work of, connecting the dots. And if you're worried about that you don't draw that well, then keep it on the loose side. Make the looseness and the sloppiness of it the aesthetic of your storytelling. Make that a thing deliberately. I think of Pepe Land, who is an amazing animator and a really, really intuitive storyteller, good storyteller. Daniel Lara, who's done a lot of work with the Blender team, with the grease pencil and whatnot. But Daniel's such a great storyteller, but yet most of the characters you see him draw actually look just like this guy. Very, very simple, very, very sketchy, very, very loose, and yet it doesn't keep him from telling awesome stories, right? I'm doing what I'm doing because I want to. This is what I want to do. The next thing I do may be very, very different. You know, these are kind of anime-informed types of characters, I guess. The next thing I do, you know, may be very cheeseball cartoony, like something you'd see on Nickelodeon. I don't know. But anyway, okay, that's it. I've been going for almost 2 hours, and I think it's been a useful session. That's kind of what I set out to do. I've been getting a lot of work done, tightening up Salt and Light. I'm very, very happy. You know, there's times in the process of this show where I'm confident, and there's times when I'm not confident. And there have been plenty of times in the last year where I have not been confident. And I've had a couple dark nights of the soul where you think, oh my God, my show's just going to suck, and it's just no good, and what do I do? And but with every movie I've made, you know, I mean, for those who don't know, I mean, here I'm a guy that has made, I've written and directed 8 different feature films, and 3 of them are, 4 have had widespread distribution, but basically one was pretty huge-ish, and then, you know, there's another one that's doing pretty well, and so I've kind of been around the block with filmmaking, you know, and you always have this dark night of the soul, and so with Salt and Light, I'm in a confident place now. I'm in a place where I know I've gone through this rigorous chopping down process, and it's starting to feel like a real show.
Service,
you know, and I'm liking what I see.
Just a little girl.
Sold?
Oh yes. You might as well look at the bright side. To marry the prince, it's quite an opportunity.
That's what everyone says. My freedom for their opportunity.
So you get the idea. So that's what I want to do, and I'm really looking forward to. I've already started working on blocking in the details of the next episode after episode 2, and so it's all good. So there's 7 people here, which is more than I normally get. Are there any questions before I bail out here? I'm happy to try my best to answer them if you have questions. I'll just wait a couple seconds here to see if anything comes up, and I'm just going to look at the show and look at what I have next on my agenda. Oh, I've got to do a bunch more color work here on these TNR shots. So if there is nothing else, it looks like there isn't. So anyway, thanks for hanging out, and by the way, hi Tiny Salad. I didn't say hello there. I haven't seen you in a while. Good to see you. Tom says, I saw half the presentation, watch the other half later. Okay, well, you know, and the first half was really kind of more about Salt and Light, and then I guess the second half was really more about these sort of what I've learned about animation. But the thing I say with some confidence is I think that if somebody was going to take everything I've talked about today and apply it, okay, there's no doubt that there's probably going to be points along the way in trying to do a larger scale project where there would be some coaching required, or, you know, sort of keeping you between the lines, so to speak. But basically, this is doable. The idea, and you know, somebody might disagree. Somebody might look at what I'm doing here and say, you know what, this whole idea that one guy can create half-hour episodes of a cartoon all by himself in 4 months, which is pretty much where I'm at this point. I'm pretty sure that's what the pace is going to be on episode 3. And when I say somebody might disagree, is they might go, well, yeah, but your show sucks. And they're welcome to that opinion. I mean, that's a totally legit opinion. They may not like what I'm doing. But the things I've shared here today are the things that I've learned are absolutely necessary if you want to be able to have a pace, something like that. If you really want to find the sweet spot between quality and economy, right? So anyway, there it is. Love and kisses, friends. As you know, there will be more later. And there will be more later.